My name's Megan Lawton. I'm Professor of Learning and Teaching in the College of Learning and Teaching. I'm just going to be facilitating this session today. This is, to say, the first of a new series of inclusive seminars that we're putting in across the year for the University of Wolverhampton, covering lots of different topics, as we've noticed how often there is a particular month or a particular day that celebrates diversity. So future sessions will be looking at preparing learning and teaching for Ramadan. We will be looking at things such as LGBT+ issues, where we'll be celebrating Windrush Day. So we're always very keen, if people are interested in taking part in these seminar series, that, you know, we're always looking for speakers. We're always happy to you know, talk to people if you've got something that you'd like to share with us across the University of Wolverhampton. So today is Happy United Nations International Day of Disabled People, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Anita Goldschmied. Anita, I attended one of her sessions that she did, and it changed the way I thought about my practice, she had a huge impact on the way that I now teach and the way that I think about the learning experiences that I prepare for my students. So it's my great pleasure to pass over to Anita now, and she's going to be running the session that is being recorded. Please use, say, the question and answer buttons, as we'll be monitoring those, and we'll make sure that you get a chance to ask your questions. So thank you very much, Anita, and over to you.
Thank you very much. I very briefly, well, thank you for being here, and I can talk about a bit autism. Hopefully today's talk will be a bit different. It will be more personal than, I think, the usual kind of definition of autism and living well and just living with autism. I will let my boundaries down a bit today, because I want to have a bit more personal, showing a bit more personal side of autism. So we'll see how it goes. I hope that I can show a slightly different side of autism and living with autism. I have a bit of a slide. It helps me structure my thoughts, as well as hopefully help you as well. So very briefly, what I will talk about, it's basically a journey. I will very, very briefly introduce autism, and it will be important why, how life is without it, without a diagnosis of autism. How does it feel, and what happens when you go through the process to get a diagnosis, and how you can live with a hidden disability. And I'm purposefully using it because I think there will be many similarities between my experiences as well as other people's experiences. And we always also have to remember that many things I say about autism, it will be my autism and not necessarily anyone else's autism. So anyone here today hope that I will give some sort of black and white tools and things around autism, or what to do with people with autism. Well, I hope that you will get a lot of things, but it will be slightly different, not necessarily some black and white straightforward thing about autism. And the reason I wanted to start with a bit of an introduction to put things into perspective, that up until the 90s, mid-90s, late 90s, there was no really such thing that Asperger's syndrome / autism, that my latest diagnosis, and we'll come back to this as well. Autism was really something that was more severe cases, something that affected boys, something that must be present in childhood, literally from birth. So that was a very stereotypical view of autism. There was not much awareness, well, certainly females on the spectrum, but generally people who displayed this so-called autistic behavior differently. So we could see and say that generation were missed and misunderstood, and all sorts of things that I had to go through, and many people at my age and beyond. And in many ways, we never had a chance. And I will come back to this, whether we really never had a chance, or actually what we had is just was a different chance, and really, what is it about? Because I often get this question, because I was late diagnosed, as it's now. I try to imply this, that I could not be diagnosed when I was in my teens or 20s with autism, because it was physically not possible. And I always get this question whether if I could, I would change this. And we'll see whether I would change this or not. And really, these were missed opportunities or just different opportunities. So very briefly, how does it feel to grow up with not having a diagnosis, and whether really it changed after? It's a kind of cliche that, yeah, you are different. But really, I'm not quite sure that I really know that I was different. There were certainly all sorts of things going on, but from my perspective, it was the world that was different, and not me. And that's an interesting and important first point to emphasize, that we might do all sorts of things, and I have a diagnosis now, but really saying that it's me who is different and anything wrong with me, that's just not the case. And we will come back to this. But certainly life before the diagnosis was different in many sense, because people ask this question as well all the time, that, how come that you suddenly became autistic? And I'm not. It's not one of those things that you just suddenly become autistic in your 20s or 30s, or for me, I was 40. That just doesn't happen. It's obviously there from the beginning, or at least something is there. So that's one of those things that people don't understand, how you can be diagnosed later on. So yes, there were obviously things happening for me before the diagnosis that made me different, and others keep on telling me that I was different. And but you don't understand what's going on. Obviously, you don't have labels to help you understand what's happening. But the question whether we really need them, and we'll see what's happening when you don't have the labels and what is out there. On the other hand, there were many. I just wasn't called autistic. I was called all sorts of things. I think the most typical one that we use often is the kind of troubled kid expression, or being clumsy or restless, or all sorts of things were always there. We just, to an extent, exchanged those to the word autism. So it just makes me think whether really they are better or worse, and we'll see once I have a new name, autism, what really changed or didn't change. So yeah, certainly life before getting a diagnosis of autism came with ups and downs, and it was obvious that I did things differently and responded to things differently. Many of us get all sorts of other diagnoses. It's potentially just the nature of life that they try to give you a diagnosis, and it was no different for me. So you will read this especially around autism, and that's why it's important to understand and put into context that if something doesn't exist as a name, that you can't just obviously say that she has Asperger's syndrome if there is no such thing in the manuals that want to categorize you. So there are this part of it as well, that they try to give you some other diagnosis, and it's still happening today, and that's why I think it's important for me to talk about this part. And then the other thing, what you do naturally, is the kind of try to fit in and pretend to be normal, which is seldom successful. So I can try as much as I want to be politically correct. If I do a good job today, you will see that it's sort of impossible, certainly not beyond the point. And I'm not sort of learned certain things, and I will give example what are some of those things that we try to do, but that's just never will be fully possible. And the question again is, should be? So life before is, I would say that it's an adventure, and this is how I look back now. Of course, when you are within, when you are in the middle of it, when you are a kid, that's not that straightforward, because yes, there are a lot of things being in the wrong, there is a lot of bullying and confusion going on, and you're getting all sorts of mixed messages, and you just really don't understand some of the things that are happening. But right now, I just look this as an adventure, and there are trials and errors and all sorts of things. So no, that's not something that suddenly came out of the blue. But whatever happening, there is a world around you that just doesn't really make sense. And because from my perspective, the world is how it is, and that's the perfect world. Because people don't understand that how come that I don't see certain things. I mean, how many times my mom used to say that, you never listen, and you always just turn the conversation to yourself, and I just really never understood it. Sometimes I still don't understand what people mean by this. But there was one moment 30 years later when I sort of started to understand that maybe I do certain things that other people don't do the way I do. Whether it's better or not, it's a different question, but there are certain things that is might different for me. But so when you live in your world, especially at certain age, you just don't understand. So that takes life in a bit of an adventurous way, and there is lack of support in a way, because when I was a kid, we were just troubled kids, and many ways it remains the case today. But there was other things on the other hand. One thing for us is that things are just never certain, never the same, never constant. You just never know what's next, and we really don't understand this, because we always mentally prepare for things. We always try to do and predict things, how it will look like. And there are some of these difficulties that you just can't understand, that things just change and don't always happen this way, and you don't understand the responses that you are getting from people, because that's just as varied. So there's a lot of things going on that turns life in a bit of an adventure and trial and errors. But that's especially in my life, we also need to take into account, on the other hand, that I grew up in a very different system that we have today. So when I was young, on the other hand, I was born in Hungary, and there was something called communism. I spent the first 15 years of my life. And funnily enough, that made a change, because I don't know what you were told at this part of the world, but what I was sort of told, for example, that on the other hand was very important to me, that certain things only happen at the West. So in communism, we don't really have certain issues. And one of those, we don't expel kids from the school. And that became very important in my life. So thinking back, when I say whether I would swap having a diagnosis now at an early age or not, I don't know, because what I also learned, that all you need is one mentor, is someone who see more than you, than a troubled kid or autism, and you can name it the way you want. That's not the point. And I always had this one person, because it was just impossible that they expel me from school until at least the age of 15, when we changed the system and very quickly learned from democracy that that's a very good thing to do, and then everything changes. But not in the first 15 years of my life. And that became very important, because they had to do something else, something that I would expect to see today, and I try to do today. They just have to figure out what to do with people like me, who was a bit hyperactive. He just out of the blue maybe did certain things that wasn't socially acceptable, because you're not supposed to hit other kids and say things out loud, which we tend to do. And there was this kind of natural support there, because they had potentially not much choice, but try to do something with us. And it gave me a lot without any naming or the word autism. They tried to build things around me. And I might had loads of issues that I couldn't really get on with children. I remember many times falling out with children and my classmates and people around me, because I just didn't understand certain things and I didn't know how to respond. Looking back, what happened, and I will come back to the importance of looking back. But the key thing is here for me that they looked at me and what we can do with me. And how they can support me, and they did support me. And based on my needs, it meant that I was put in all sorts of activities. It's a shame that I can't show you the end result of it, but I have basically that much of all sorts of certificates and prizes and everything I won, because I might had some too much energy and things I did it as a kid that we don't like on the one hand, because it's, it causes some disruption. It's exactly the same energy and exactly the same issue that on the other hand could be turned to things like winning everything. I mean, it doesn't matter whether it was a BMX cycling competition or learn a Russian poem and go to a poem competition or highway code competition. I mean, it's hilarious. What are the competition I just was put in. I have a nice collection. It's basically everything. They just try to find something to occupy me rather than doing other things. And it worked very well. And that's, I think, a very important thing that made, especially these years, made a difference without a diagnosis of autism. And I'm very grateful for those people who saw something more than being always in the headmaster office, because once again, Anita did something, and being mom as well. And there was all sorts of other things that you learn without a diagnosis before you get an autism, that you just naturally start doing things that suits you. I never knew why, but I generally started going to do my shopping, especially later on when it became possible, when there are not many people around. And I started providing myself slowly with all sorts of support. Exercise, certain activities become important. So you have an adventurous life before. And if you have adult diagnosis that most of us have, then that can hinder as well as help. And then obviously things change now. So we have a self-awareness or better awareness of Asperger and people like me. And then you start self-identification and identification. And especially post-2000, more and more people identified early. So whether when I get this question whether I should be diagnosed early or not, I personally would not necessarily change my first 15 years of life, but because of these things that was there for me. What happened after 15, it's a completely different story, because it went some very difficult years. I started 3 times university and I never got the support, and I never could finish it. And that's when it comes to a different story. So we need to put everything into perspective, what works and what don't work. It's not, you can't say that, yes, that's why we want this system because it worked. No, it worked in certain situation. But the reason I put down that I, on the other hand, worked in the private sector of lot, because the moment it became employment, then I got loads of support there because they just naturally accommodated me. Once again, similar, not the same reason, but when I work for a company who focuses on outcomes and the work you produce, then I was quite safe again, because there was different expectations. So we need to put things into perspective when it comes to this question, what to do and how to support us. So why then I ended up with a diagnosis? Well, it's always the same story. Something happened, and you just end up once again with the professionals that what's going on. Now, by this time, I don't know, I've digested at least 5, 6 professionals. One of them were more hilarious than the other. I mean, obviously, we need to put this into perspective as well. They worked with what was available for them. So I'm not necessarily blaming them, although there was really some hilarious experiences that potentially I don't have the time to share. But one of them were decided that they just couldn't really cope with me because I just really didn't fit it in any of those boxes that were available for professionals. So one of them decided that, you know what, let's do some time traveling and hypnosis sort of time traveling to find out what happened in not even this life, the previous life, and we really can find out what's wrong with you. Looking back now, it's kind of funny, but you can imagine when you are, I don't know, 19, 21 and the professional comes along and the best idea is that if you are not enough in your present life, that you are having a bit of an issue and you may be a troubled kid, let's go back 300 years and then find out that you were a really, really bad person in 300 years ago. And I don't know, I ended up in a whale and birds, and it was the weirdest professional in my life. And people sometimes just don't think, I think, the damage they potentially do. So you can imagine, thanks God that at the end she said that, Anita, thank you very much for being my patient. I'm so grateful because now I understand why my husband left me. And you are just thinking that that's hilarious. So I'm here because I'm just really not coping with my life. I don't understand certain things. You don't know what to do with me. So we do some weird hypnosis that thanks that I just managed to somehow process. And at the end, I actually managed to cure you. So I'm very quickly, I think, realized that how I need to handle psychology and psychiatry, and it's no disrespect, but yeah, these are interesting experiences naturally. But things happen in life, and you just end up again in the same circle that something just not quite right. And by this time I was quite protected. I was a university student and things were really going well. I sort of found my place where I could naturally fit in, and I even forget that I used to have differences because I was just in the right environment, and it was accommodating me. So I decided that it's time to get a job. And job for me, for this, I don't know, I never really had to go through interviews, maybe 1 or 2 times, but I was rather headhunted, and people suggested that they know a job for me and they heard about my work or whatever. I had my own company as well. So I never really understood the interview process. I was very naive. And I went for a graduate management scheme because I'm a dually qualified. I'm a nurse and a social worker. And one thing I've been doing in the past 10 years as a professional, I just can't decide between health and social. It's something maybe to do with my own past, that I just can't separate my biology from my social. It's impossible. I can't separate the biological part of autism, if there is such thing, with the environment and the things happen to me. And it became one of the key things for me to work with health and social. So it came to the job, and I went through the NHS and the local authority graduate management scheme, and hilarious. I was, as I said, I was okay by this time, and I sort of knew that I eventually grew up. I mean, even I can grow up one day. Wasn't easy, but sort of managed 20 years later, but here we go. And the first part, you can imagine, it was sort of easy for me. It's all this kind of online numerical reasoning, verbal reasoning, situational judgment test, which I love doing. Many of us, I think, we're very comfortable with technology and certain things. And it came to the interview. And I just, really didn't know what to expect. So I went to the NHS interview. And they started asking me the first question so tell me a bit about yourself. First question that I just had no idea what to answer. And by this time, just to put you into perspective, I'm closing to 40. And I just really didn't understand the question. First of all, I didn't understand what is a bit, because believe it or not, at this stage, you still don't understand certain things about you and the world around you. I really didn't know why would they ask this question to start with, when I had to submit all sorts of work, and really you should read, isn't it, a bit about me. So you really should show me a bit more respect, just so not understanding anything. Then one question came after the other. So by the second or the third question, I was really so lost that I was just turning the floor, and I just really had no idea what's happening. And I just looked at the guys and said, I love puzzles. Now, English people, British people, but particularly English people, very famous about their poker face and being a gentleman. Now, you can imagine that the head of the NHS, one of the commissioner at this point, just couldn't cope with me anymore. So it's one thing that I couldn't answer any of the questions so far. But when they are asking about team working and project, and all I can say is why I usually fail team working, because that was my answer for the team working question, now that I remember, and that I love puzzle, regardless what was the question, you can imagine that they lost it. So they just no more kind of I can control my expression sort of behavior. On my end, that was absolutely a hilarious, in a not necessarily nice way, experience. So I walked out of the room. They tried to ask me how was it, because I think there was a bit of an expectation that I will do well. I didn't. So I just told them that I have no idea what happened. And I walked back to the car, and it was a different word. And I made a mistake, because I'm still learning about myself, that I parked the car at the highest possible point of this kind of car parking thingy. By the time I reached the bottom, I smashed the car at least 3 places. So that was a kind of warning sign to be on the phone immediately. I did a stroke assessment myself, because it was just such a experience that once again just took everything apart, and I couldn't process. So I quickly did the stroke check, that I can read my reading, I can talk. I made a phone call, can you understand me? So my speech is okay. So we realized in the next 5 minutes that it's not a stroke or anything like this. And we were on the phone all along with my ex to be safe, keep me safe, and others on the road as well, obviously. And I went home, and that was, again, the kind of moment that you were quite reminded that when you live between these extremes, skills, and then on the other moment, in a completely different situation that just make no sense, that's just something is not right. By this time, I was old enough and clever enough to collect all sorts of things, to know that there is something not wrong with me. It's that I couldn't go down this narrative anymore. So at this point, all this thing that, yeah, because I'm this, nah, it doesn't work. It might work when you are in your teenage years, that people can keep on telling you that it's you and you and you. You learn after a while that it's not, because there are all sorts of proof that I actually do very well. There are a lot of good things I'm doing. So there must be something else. And that's when I once again decided that I really don't like professionals, but I somehow still can't find certain answers no matter how much I try. Let's go to see someone. And that's when I was diagnosed with, well, Asperger's syndrome, which is now autism, which is a hilarious thing on its own. So that was a very interesting moment. And then basically you do what you've been doing in your entire life, try to put the pieces together that what's happening. And it's a never-ending story. It never ended up until today. But I'm one of those people who decided to accept the diagnosis of autism, because let's not kid ourselves. There are many people out there who won't have any diagnosis, and I don't think that they are any way better than I am. So who gets a diagnosis and who doesn't, and what kind of diagnosis you get, I think it's a very different question. They should be handled as an administrative purpose. What we do in everyday life, how we can work together, how we can support each other is a completely different story. And I want to focus on this one, because I think diagnosis doesn't have a role in this. And this is what the diagnosis didn't change, actually. And I will say this because, yes, it brings certain answers, but it brings new issues. The diagnosis is not some sort of magic that suddenly will change everything. although at the beginning you really believe this. And it causes you sometimes more issues because people sell all sorts of unrealistic hopes and unrealistic dreams what will happen when you have a diagnosis. It's like suddenly all of you will change and won't, hurt me anymore, or we will suddenly, I will suddenly be able to not to say things that are inappropriate. Now that's just never happens again. There is more awareness because now I can look up different things, but you are also getting these unrealistic hopes as well that what will change and won't. You will get certain support, but then people start questioning it. Then I have certain answers, but then I keep on questioning it because I still keep on questioning whether I'm autistic, because apparently I have black and white thinking, and you look at all of these things about autism and I just don't see this, because what I see that actually I have a pretty analytical brain who always have a look at what's happening and have A, B, C, D, E plan what to do. And what I see that other people seem to have quite black and white idea what is good and what is not, and what is this and what is that. So I'm having issues with all these things that, so what is what? You get trust in people that, yeah, they will support it. Most of the time you lose this trust as quickly as you gained, because we are humans and it needs a bit more work than that just try to work with these black and white answers. You will have some better relationships, but you also lose relationships because not everyone can handle this change and your diagnosis. In my family, it went well. My mom is my mom. She's hilarious. Her response was something like that when I first asked about what kind of child I was, she said, unbearable. Fair enough, mom. When I told them that I got a diagnosis, mom was something like, yes, I told you from the beginning that something is not right with you. Thank you, mom, at least you accept it. So that's something. My dad was even better. Love my dad. He told me that now that you talk about autism, daughter, I see that's in my mother, which is my grandma, that I see the sign. So maybe your grandma, my mother, was autistic. And at this point, I didn't say a word to daddy that usually between grandma and me, there is someone called you, although there are certain genetic things that skip generation, but generally there's some sense to be a link. But I didn't want to push daddy it's his thing to think about it. And he came once to visit me. And we just left the airport, literally just left the airport, get into the car. I couldn't even get out from Heathrow to the main road when dad looked at me that, daughter, there is some sort of system in the car, license plates. I sort of see the numbers that they follow a pattern, but I can't make sense of it. And I just started laughing and I explained that yeah, the first thing I learned when I moved to Britain that license plates in this country are fascinating. We don't do this. And I explained that how license plates works and what the numbers mean. And then I looked at her that, yeah, I did the same. And he said that, well, this is what autistic people do. And I know that fine daddy arrived as well, and he can start putting pieces together. And that was important. And that's why I say facing your past, rewriting memories. And to be honest, once you do this, it's become best part of it, because you don't often have this opportunity that you do have to go through your past, because any memory I stored that potentially can be painful, that, the kids were telling me that I can't come to the birthday party because of this and that. You need to rethink that maybe there was something in it. That maybe mom is right, that I wasn't necessarily an easy child. At the end of the day, I'm always covered with bruises because I was playing this toy and hurt my nose and ended up in the A&E. And every day there was just something, because we are a bit clumsy as well. So you need to, you rewrite or at least rethink all of your memories. That is, I think, a good thing. And certainly for me, it was brilliant. But then the journey goes on. So what do you do with your autism? And disclosure is the bit that I will say that things don't really change. things are the same in many ways as it used to be. But I say that we just reshuffled the deck, and this is what happened. We just reshuffled the deck. People responded to me different ways without a label of autism, and people still respond the way when I disclose autism. There are various situations, various ways to disclose it, and you will get various reaction. And this sense the adventure continues. That you just never really know what will happen and what happened. And I think to an extent, it should be, because this gives us opportunities to understand each other better and just realize that these are not easy things. It's human beings working together, living together, respecting each other. Differences is work, it requires work. And autism as an identity is not an answer for everything. It gave me wings. I do like understanding certain things better, but it also breaks them. It also takes away things, because this is when I'm getting even today, even from people who are supposed to know a lot about autism, that, yeah, but that's why she can't communicate. I can communicate. I can communicate actually very well. I don't like communicating about certain things. I really don't care. What did you do at the weekend? I really don't care that you had a gin and tonic at the weekend because you went to a wedding or not. If I'm at a meeting, if we work together, yes, I will hyper focus on the work. I arrive to a meeting, I want to be at the meeting and let's crack on with the job. I won't communicate necessarily about certain things. I can, and I learn, I try what is important for other people, because I do not want purposefully, obviously, to disrupt, but we do, and that's part of it. But it's just one part of it. So what we need when we think about not just autism, because you will see that it's a bit of everything. It's the same with other conditions, if we want to name them. So what we need, my ex sent me this email not long ago that, hi, we can treat for you, maybe a familiar one. And I had an instant response to him. I have no idea what you mean. And I sent him a picture, which wasn't that difficult, because as you can see, I was working on my laptop, having my favorite Haribo, which was already prepared for me, how I eat Haribo. And that's all we need. Yeah, this is how I do. Wouldn't be a much better assessment. You can do an assessment on yourself right away. First of all, you only eat sweets that has at least 5-6 different colors. I won't just eat any sweets. Haribo and M&Ms, they are particularly the favorite one, and Maum, anything that has at least 4, preferably 5-6 different shape and color. Then I can tell from the picture that I just opened this box, because first you have to eat the outliers, and there is far too many red hearts than other on the picture. So I just started the process, because you eat the outliers first, and then you have to eat them by color. It's never going to happen that you will ask me to get some Haribo and I will just get out some gum bear. No way. And if you ever see me eating Haribo and I don't ask you to get some, is because I can't let you mess with my system. And I'm apologizing for this, but that's the case. It's had to happen a way. So if you have a tendency to do certain things in particular way, yeah, you need to think of certain traits. Slightly different for other people with autism. My friend, who is my best friend, we know each other from the age of 6. She's autist, but she's the type without the diagnosis. She's a bit different from me, because she will take out by certain types and colors, but she will eat it half and put half back the bag. So I would certainly not suggest you ever to accept any Haribo from her either. And this is all we need to get to understand, I think, each other. And I believe these are harmless things. So it's no point to tell me that I'm not supposed to doing this. I will. And I do other things. And I asked this question from my psychiatrist, that you can't be serious that now I can't have imaginary friends anymore. I'm not going to stop talking to Jack and Maya and the rest of them. And he was just laughing. He was actually a quite good one. And he said, nah, you don't have to. Think about the consequences socially, because some people don't like it, but that's fine. You can keep any friends you want. I can't imagine how boring your life must be when you don't do this. So that's just from my side. And I do all sorts of other things that I still do. Sometimes it was handy when I had someone with me, because people around me was a bit more safe. But it is how it is, and that's all we need. I said this at the beginning, that I have a diagnosis, and I do respect that we are different and do things differently. And I do my best to learn your word, because the better I understand your word, the better we can work together. But it's no way that anyone ever will convince me that I'm different or I'm autistic per se. And it's hilarious when we get in this question asked that, do you consider yourself disabled? Typical HR question. And I say, no, because I would never consider myself disabled. You would be much better as the question whether I, under the Equality Act, I come under disability, because then the answer would be yes. But asking me whether I think that is something wrong with me, nothing is wrong with me. And that's just how it should be. And that's sort of arriving to the end, that the aim is to live as well as possible. The reason the well is in brackets, because we really need to move away from things like, oh, you can't say that someone with autism suffer. I do suffer sometimes. It's part of the story. And I don't even need any one of you to have moments when my own busy head becomes difficult. It never stops working. It never stops analyzing things. And sometimes it's tiring, and sometimes it's overwhelming. And then I don't need anything else, just that, accept it. And I'm not going to fight against these things and change because it just have to be changed. No, it doesn't have to be changed. It's perfect the way it is. And if it's difficult, that's fine, and I understand. It's difficult not to do something. People generally want to help, but that's sometimes the help is just to live it, and that's the biggest help. But the way I deal with it is, it does help when I more understand how you operate, because I've been living with myself quite a long time, so I'm having a quite good understanding. For me, it's more about understanding your word, so they can negotiate better the differences. It's more about shaping the word as much as I can. I can't change everything. I don't think that I should. If I don't tolerate noise, or if difficult for me to go to a pub because I can't screen out all the conversation going on, then I won't. And I don't want, obviously, all the places shut down just because I can't cope, and I will try to shape the word as much as I can. And of course, people will help me as well. And if it's very important, we will go to the park first, have a conversation there, and then we can go to the pub, because then I can actually connect with you just differently. Don't expect me to do the same thing. And then we can start negotiating. For me, what is also, I think, important to live well with all these things is getting out of my comfort zone, is experimenting, because I believe that no matter how much you are inclusive and want to help, the more independent I am, the more I'm able to understand and manage myself, the better I am. And that's my philosophy with other people as well when I work with them. I don't want to tell people that, yeah, we will do everything for you. No, figure it out how we can do it together as a very minimum, or what you can do. And that's what makes me feel and live well and safe with my condition. So I think we do need to get out of these stereotypias it is how it is, and mind the gaps, because things are not straightforward. The very last slide I have, and I kind of come to the end, was inspired by a dad who has an autistic son, which I rewrote a little bit. in terms of, so what is autism? Because this is what we are keep on getting, all these stereotypia that autism is this and that, and that was inspired by him when he was writing about his son, that maybe it's not my autism then that makes me hold my breath, it's my anxiety. So it's not my autism that make me burn and injure myself, it's my clumsiness. I wanted to find a picture for you when I'm absolutely covered by bruises, because we are very clumsy, something that diagnostic manuals never talk about. So autism isn't bringing on tantrums, it's my lack of coping mechanism. So the reason why my mind never rests, why I can get low mood and can actually really suffer sometimes, that's nothing to do with me autism. It's maybe because I'm depressed or have bipolar disorder or God knows what else they can find. So when I separate the sweets the way you saw by line and line up my food, because my food on a plate looks beautiful, by the way. So I don't know what's wrong with the way I plate the food, that they have to be lined and separated. It actually looks beautiful. I potentially could compete with it. So that's not an autistic behavior, it's an OCD behavior. The same way that when I'm talking to myself and the green tea in the shop, that's something to do with schizophrenia. So the fact that I have hunger attacks and I can't tolerate certain sounds, on the other hand, I can really push my limits to the point when I don't feel pain or fatigue, that has nothing to do with my autism, it's sensory issues. The reason I cannot fall asleep before I discovered the magic of melatonin isn't because of my autism, it's because I also have a sleep disorder. So then what the heck is autism? Well, thank you very much. That was my understanding. Well, I could go forever. At the beginning, I wanted to say that it's so difficult to talk about this and myself because I never do this. Then you start talking, you realize that I can keep on talking potentially for hours about autism and my autism and what we should do. So I would prefer now to stop and give you opportunities to ask any questions or any comments, anything that you would have wanted to learn a bit more. As I said, it won't be a traditional introduction to autism because I don't think that there is such thing. It's more about taking it a bit more personal. So hopefully we can negotiate.
Just Anita, thank you so much for your candid and insightful presentation. You never disappoint. Every time I talk to you, I learn something new. So many people in the chat and in the questions have said the same thing and saying thank you very much for your presentation and your personal view. You know, it's been invaluable. People are saying it's been invaluable to listen to you, and it's been truly fascinating, and people are just saying how much they've enjoyed it. So thank you very much. Will, can I hand over to you if you've got any questions coming in for Anita?
You can indeed, and please feel free to put your questions into the chat. As I said, just thank you again, Anita. That was a fascinating talk. I think the one question we've got at the moment is what opportunities does the future of your diagnosis offer you?
Can you repeat the question? What future?
What opportunities does the future of your diagnosis offer you?
Okay. Wow. Interesting question. It's very good question. I think it's, as I tried to say, it's to an extent it's a never-ending story and adventure, and it changes and as it should. I think on the one hand, I try to more and more try to talk about it to start with. So that's something that I now try to do, to give a different side of it. I was a bit funnily trying to say that at one point I wanted to give it back, but that's not possible. So that's future is sort of not available anymore. So I don't know. It's all full of surprises, and maybe it should be. So we'll see. I certainly use it in my work. It certainly helps me to understand quite complex as well as different issues that we are facing in life, and I can use a lot in these areas as well. So we'll see where it takes me. But based on the first 40 plus years, I think there are surprises waiting, and there are adventures to come.
I think just to add to that, somebody's made a comment that it's very rare for autistic people to have the opportunity to speak for themselves. And I actually think this is something that I'm really passionate after talking to you. I just thought, like me being dyslexic, nobody knows my story better than myself. So I think, thank you so much for sharing your experiences, and thank you for the person who's made that comment, that actually we need to be providing opportunities for more people to talk about what life is like for there. And your life is beautiful, as you said. Your life may not be the same life I have, but it's not deficit. And that sometimes is we can have that view. Somebody's also put a comment saying maybe there's a book in this that actually those lived experiences.
Yeah, it's a funny thing that by my profession and by my nature, I always advocate for others. It's never difficult to speak up for other people, but it's somehow we find it difficult when it comes to us to talk about ourselves, or even protect ourselves and advocate for ourselves. So it's something that I'm learning, and I certainly will try to do more, especially if it has just one person or changes one practice. Then I guess it's something that I need to consider.
We've got a couple of questions coming in, Will.
We have indeed. So regarding Asperger's, is it still used as diagnosis? If someone was diagnosed with it in teens, should they have been rechecked and re-diagnosed, even if they are now 36 years old? It is very close to my heart to know. That's an anonymous attendee.
Yeah, and yes, and that's one of the reasons why I was referring that autism identity, any identity, if it's really strictly you are holding on, it has its dangers, because technically I was diagnosed with Asperger because that was that time the official diagnosis, but then a few years later they changed it, and now we don't have Asperger anymore. We have autism requiring level 1, 2, 3 support. So there are people actually out there who so got used to building up an Asperger identity to a point that they are saying that we have nothing to do with autism because we can get a degree, which is not healthy within disability society either. So that's the reason that these diagnoses help. It gives us a framework. Human beings love categories because things become complex, but we just have to learn where and how to use them. So right now it would be a diagnosis of autism because there is no more Asperger. I don't think that people need to be rechecked because Asperger is automatically fit the autism level 1 diagnosis requiring level 1 support. So it helps, but don't hang on, because who knows what will be my next diagnosis, and before I die, there won't be autism anymore. We don't know what the next 20, 30 years bring. So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you for that, Anita. And the next question is, you mentioned that you thought you were having a stroke while sitting in your car after an interview that went wrong. Can you describe what this felt like? I think I've experienced this lots, and it hasn't been connected with my autism.
Yeah, well, there is a lot of things, a lot of misconceptions about autism. So people say that we are insensitive and that's why we don't look at things. And no, it's just the opposite. We are so sensitive, we so can't filter out information that if I don't block out certain things, I would go crazy because I constantly understand, observe, and analyze. So no, they don't connect a lot of things, I think, to autism. How did it feel? Very difficult to describe. I knew that it was a completely different experience for anything I really experienced before. I wasn't able to perform any of the tasks I supposed to at this stage or age or whatever. It was physically like my brain wasn't working. It was physically being somehow paralyzed and not being able to respond. And obviously, especially if you have a bit of a medical training, stroke or some sort of temporary mental breakdown make more sense than thinking that, oh, I must be autistic. You would never think that you are autistic. Even when I went through the diagnosis, I still thought that I have ADHD, just I don't have attention deficit. I have hyperattention, hyperdeficit. So I made up my own diagnosis, basically. So it was just one of those moments that everything was so contradictory and so didn't make sense that that you were aware that something just was happening. You just didn't know what. It wasn't just some simple, I don't understand the question situation. It was very weird. Yeah, so I did the check what's happening. I felt so lost of words and thoughts and everything. So yeah, it was a very, yeah, I won't forget.
I'm aware we're running out of time, but we've got a few more questions.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm fine.
So Anita, what sort of work are you doing when you're at your best? And do you think we can learn from this to support people with autism? Or do you think this says more just about you?
No, I think it's a bit of both. All of us are different. So whatever I say, it never will be true for every autistic person out there. It's just not possible. But it's the same way that I can talk to you about me being a female or having long hair. That won't be the same for everyone with the same hair length. So, you know, it's no such, it's very, we always have to take everything in a sense that, yes, I think you learn a little bit about not even just autism, it's just being different, because many of the things I experience will have overlapping experiences with people who have a so-called depression diagnosis or OCD, I mean, or even schizophrenia or anxiety. So, you know, there are overlapping stories, and those overlapping stories, nothing to do with these so-called diagnoses. So in an ideal world, it's okay to know about these diagnoses, and it's okay because we need them, because otherwise the university and certain institutions just potentially would be struggling. But if you really want to support a student in a classroom, if you're walking on a street and you see someone who is stressful or lost or whatever you are seeing, having some shouting in the middle of the street, labels doesn't help anyway. So I think what we need to learn about are these differences and what to do with them. So you learned a bit about autism, you learned a bit about depression and other things as well, because I end up sometimes in those moments as well. But you cannot apply anything, just a kind of ready frame answer when you see someone with autism the next time, because we are different. And autism is just one part of me. I have all sorts of other things that I do because I like music or because I do certain other things. And this will be a mixture of components. Autism very rarely, or any condition, very rarely will just override the person that you become the autism or the depression. It doesn't work like this.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. There are a few more comments coming in. But we won't really have time to look at them. Overwhelmingly, people want to just say thank you so much for sharing your experiences today, and what a difference this has made, and how refreshing it is to hear those personal insights. This recording will be made available. I don't know, Anita, whether you would be willing to take any questions outside of here, if people wanted. So obviously Anita's a member of staff of the University of Wolverhampton, and she's made a huge difference to my understanding. So I just really wanted to say thank you so much for your presentation today. For participants, thank you very much for attending. We will be sending out the link, and from the chat, there's been, you're making a difference to people, so thank you so much for what you've done.
Thank you very much, and yeah, you can find me, you can find my email address, so please feel free to contact me for any reason. I'm quite very open, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. In that case, we're going to stop the recording now, folks, and thank you all very much for your attendance. Keep an eye on Insider and Jeff's updates for the next sessions that we'll be running in this series. And thank you very much to Anita. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, lots of things, wonderful event coming in. Thank you, Anita, brilliant. So if we'd like to stop the recording now.